Okay, and I have to accept that it's being recorded. Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We're going to be talking about, if you saw the post, systems transformation with Kanwarpal Dhaliwal of RYSE Youth Center. Kanwarpal has been leading work in West Contra Costa County in California to build an emergency rapid response to the many needs that have been generated by the pandemic crisis in that community. The initiative is called COVID Community Care and brings together the principles of mutual aid and policy change. Excuse me. Um, Sorry, I'm still here. Brings together principles of mutual aid and policy change to address the current crisis in a way that lays groundwork for continued change. And so Kanwarpal presented about COVID community care at a meeting I attended. And so as I was listening to everything she was describing, I knew that this Better Normal community would be interested in learning more about the work, because in the previous or the ongoing conversations, that's exactly what people have been talking about across different sectors like healthcare and education. Everyone is noticing that the needs that are in crisis have always been full of inequities and things that are unaddressed. And so what's exciting about what Kanwarpal and the community in West Contra Costa County are doing is they're addressing it now in a way that is they can sustain for the future. So a lot of people have been reading the essay by Arundhati Roy, where she says the pandemic is a portal. And I feel like this initiative, they're walking through that portal already. So I knew that this community would want to hear more. And so I'm gonna turn it over to Kanwarpal shortly, but I just wanna tell you a little bit about her and RYSE. In a little bit, I'll put a link to the blog post in case you didn't see it, because I also linked to RYSE Center because you'll want to follow up and learn more. And Kanwarpal is the associate director and co-founder of RYSE Center in Richmond, California. She has a master's degree in public health, and she's also adjunct faculty at San Francisco State University. In her role at RYSE, she guides the implementation of healing-centered practices grounded in racial justice and liberation across all program areas. She develops, promotes, and advocates for policies, investments, practices, and research that enlivens healing and justice across the fields and sectors in which RYSE works. Her life's purpose is to contribute to movements, communities, and legacies of liberation that honor the ancestors who fought for her existence and to forge a world that is just and gentle for future generations. And so today we're going to hear a very concrete example of how she does that work. And I'm so excited that she was able to join us because she's doing a lot of stuff. She made time for us today. So I'll turn it over to Kanwarpal. And I forgot to ask you, well, you know how to share screen if you want to.
Yeah, I think I do. We'll all see. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good Friday, or good Saturday. I see there's some folks, it's Saturday already. I always start, and I do this very selfishly for myself, with just sort of inviting us to take 3 breaths together. And I especially want to honor the space and the breath, the inhalations and the exhalations, and in honor of Ahmaud Arbery. I know today was going to be his 26th birthday. And in some ways I feel wrong that we're working, or in a lot of ways. But I also know that part of this, it's important to continue to name and give fire to the work of liberation that's so critical. So I'm going to invite us to let's do 3 breaths. Inhale for 4 count, exhale for 6. I'm going to share screen while we're coming back together. you able to see the screen? I see some heads nodding, so I see some, all right. Again, thank you for inviting me, for inviting RYSE, inviting West Contra Costa County to this space. I feel both honored, humbled, and a deep sense of responsibility and gratitude to be a representative, a steward of the work that really is held by hundreds and hundreds of people in our community. And I come to this space as part of an organization that was created out of the organizing and leadership of young people of color, those young people most structurally vulnerable to systems violence and state violence, who took the risk to hold adults and the systems responsible for them accountable. So I am not a young person anymore, but I am a very fortunate adult who is trusted and entrusted to tell the truth, and to build the worlds that we deserve. So I appreciate being here. I see some familiar names and faces, so it's good to see you all. Danielle, thank you for inviting me. I feel like, you know, just for full transparency, folks should know Danielle and I are kin, and we hang out even outside of work. And so it feels really good to be here and connected. So I'm gonna share this process that we're in right now with our larger community. So I'll go through, it's about 6 or 7 slides, and then really want to just open it up for conversation. And I think what I want to say here is that I always find it a challenge to share work in like slides, because they're so neat and tidy, and there's nothing about this work that's neat and tidy. And it's very messy. And I think, you know, it's the beautiful mess that allows us to come together for a rapid response for systems transformation. I'll also say we are figuring things out as we go along. So there's no sort of evidence-based model that we look to. There's no sort of like funding partner that came down and said, hey, you all need to do this, or we've got, it was like, what do we need to do, and how do we galvanize and create a space to come together? So with that, RYSE convenes the West Contra Costa COVID Community Care Coalition. We are a coalition of about, right now, over 100 partners that include public agencies, community providers, funders, electeds, and also coalitions. And we came together the first week of our shelter in place in West Contra Costa. For those of you who don't know, we are in the California Bay Area. So we are about 8 miles, maybe even less, from Oakland, on the other side of the bay from San Francisco. And RYSE specifically works in Richmond, California. But our work goes across West Contra Costa County. And so we just really invited our partners and those we know to say, hey, should we just get on a call, a Zoom call, which, I mean, I've never really facilitated anything on Zoom until 7 weeks ago, to just say what's going on, what are folks seeing, what are we doing, how can we start to organize? And we were, it was both not surprising, but also so pleasantly sort of like nourishing to see we had almost 100 folks come to that call again. And then you can see we also, as we committed to weekly calls, just to really figure out what does it mean to be in coordination, but also as we're in coordination on immediate needs, how do we also continue to name the structural conditions and social conditions that have brought us to this need? Because we know pandemics just reveal existing inequity and dehumanization, increase them, amplify them. So it's nothing new, but there's a newness and an amplification of inequities that will only continue if we don't name them while we're also in immediate relief and response. And so I'm wondering if somebody on the call would be willing to read the intentions out loud.
I'll start, and maybe while maybe people would think about volunteering for our commitments, but our intentions are to affirm our humanity and interdependence, to hear and share brief and key updates, landscape of conditions, needs, and resources, to assess allocate, and advocate for immediate, ongoing, and long-term needs, priorities, and possibilities.
Thank you. And is anyone queued up for the commitments?
So far, okay, so Natalia, okay, so let me find, go for it.
So our commitments: we give each other and ourselves grace and space. We stay mindful of time and space we take. We get through what we get through. We participate in our formal roles and consider all our networks and resources. We appreciate what is being done as we continue to figure out what we do, and we stay tender with each other and strident in our solidarity.
Thank you, Natalia. And so these commitments have been what has sort of carried us through the weekly calls, the work in between, the relationship building and connections with each other throughout, and that really honoring and acknowledging that we cannot be doing business as usual. Many of us know that business as usual has needed to be different for a long time, but we're also in a moment where maybe those who didn't understand it, didn't see it, didn't know how to change. We're now in a time where it's like absolutely necessary. So we're gonna leverage that, for lack of a better word. And as an organization, we meet young people where they are. We also meet each other where we are, with the full expectation and anticipation that we can move together. And as an organization, we ask to be met where we are. We're a learning organization. We know we stumble, we make mistakes, but we also know that you can't do transformational work without stumbling and making mistakes. And so with that, go to the next slide. It was really important for us to also lay out early on, like, sort of what's the framework. So as a coalition, we could be in a response in a way that is about offering resources and supports in a very transactional way. So we need to get people food. That is absolutely necessary. We need to get people basic supplies. We need to be coordinated in our supports and services and service delivery. But if we're only doing it from a place of transaction and need and reaction, then we are going to continue to sort of enable the cycles of injustice and inequity and the conditions that brought us here. So it was really important for us to lay out these interacting layers of solidarity, that our aid is mutual, again, not transactional, that we have what we need, and what we don't have is actually a reflection of systems violence and systems inadequacy, not behavioral issues or community pathology issues. We also know that what's so important is continued connection. People and community needing to know we feel seen. And in Richmond and in West Contra Costa, I mean, often we are overlooked in the Bay Area. So there's definitely already a sense of we're forgotten. There's been generations of disinvestment. And as we're experiencing rapid gentrification and displacement, what's being created new, excuse me, that's my home phone. What's being created new is actually for those who don't live in the community yet. So how do we as an organization and as a coalition create and build the systems we deserve for those of us who are here, and even for those and in honor of those of us who have been displaced or no longer here? That we also understand that our work as a coalition is to really look at and intervene harmful policies and systems, and also create policies and systems that enable transformation and that enable a sustained kind of, we don't call it, we're moving from sanctuary, safety net to sanctuary net. That how do we create something where it's not about catching folks when they're falling, but creating a solid enough rubric and grounding that everyone feels solid and stable. And so the idea of a net to catch someone is something that we're shifting from. and that we know the conditions we're in are rooted in the vicious and voracious ways that white supremacy and capitalism sort of run our lives, our livelihoods, our organizations. And so naming these conditions is so important and so critical in order for us to repair and to build the systems we deserve. So these layers of solidarity is, again, the frame in which, as a coalition, you know, we haven't asked people to sign on formally and create MOUs. We have just said, look, this is how we're moving in the work. And we know we have learning to do. There's no roadmap for it. We haven't figured it out. There's no logic model. It's going to feel hard at times. People are going to be, you know, challenged personally in really deep ways, professionally. But we have to do this, and people keep showing up. And so we're going to trust our process because we trusted each other to show up. And we also trust that those who can move through it will. If folks aren't ready for it, they'll make other choices. But it'll also invite those who have been waiting for an opportunity to actually be in transformational response and not just rapid response or reactionary response. So these next slides are just in our first few weeks, we, as many groups and folks probably have done, is sort of, what's the need? Like, can we do some quick assessments? And those are happening. And so you'll see here just, I mean, what I'm sharing here is what we go through on each call. So I didn't create anything different or fancier for all of us here, but we have identified some areas of direct support, emerging support, and also some of the key partners that are holding, convening, and moving it. And so if there's questions about a certain resource, about a policy, about, you know, working with a resident or a family or a young person who might need some supports, we actually now, the 100-some folks have names for each of these areas that they can contact. And if these contacts don't know or don't have the information or resource, they have committed to figuring out who to connect with and how to support. So we have that kind of integrated system, almost like a resource system, that both there's some centering and structure, but it also still allows for people to move and connect with each other as needed. And then again, in reference to, you know, the layers of solidarity, like also understanding that, you know, in a pandemic and in any place where there's sort of like, you know, kind of mass distress, and especially we know over and over again when middle-class white communities get impacted and burdened, that is usually the tipping point for our systems to actually make moves to better communities. And that is like, the history of public health. And I'm formally trained in public health, and so I'll own that and know that that's our work to disrupt. We were established as a colonizing agent in other places, and then also as an agent and an institution to contain and control Black communities and brown communities. And so we know that, like, for instance, the shelter in place and joint orders, we constantly ask, like, is there an enforcement part of this? And if this is, we've asked our board of supervisors, how are you going to ensure that Black and brown children aren't over policed? If they're, you know, if they're wearing masks, it's going to like cause alarm. If they're not, it's going to cause alarm. And as we know over and over again, that there really is no safety. And so interventions, we really need our systems to understand that when they're looking at interventions and mitigation measures, who are they really making them for? Who gets left out? And what are sort of some of the collateral consequences of harm and danger that can exist for communities already vulnerable to state violence? And, you know, in these conditions, I mean, as an organization built on young people who really did courageous dreaming, that we have to continue dreaming. We're not going to come out of this by doing things the way we've done them. And that we know that we have to think and feel and be different. And so thinking about how do we continue to work to shift power. We often talk about our work as building loving relationships, cultivating loving relationships, so we can cultivate loving power to cultivate and build loving systems. And so you'll see some of the key tenets that we've sort of raised in our conversations, but also, again, for those of us who have been doing movement work, these also feel like just the non-negotiables we're working from. So many things that we've been told are impossible or that can't happen by our systems and our electeds, and, you know, even our families and our friends saying, like, you know, we're thinking too far out the box. Now they're just becoming practice in this pandemic. And so I think it's that, how do we acknowledge, like, all along this could have happened, and honor the rage and the frustration that we've known that, but also while it's happening, that the systems have been disrupted. How do we keep the disruption moving, again, in a way that doesn't amplify danger for our Black and Brown communities and our Indigenous communities? And that also helps, I think, white people and people who hold white privilege to understand the ways in which they've been cradled and protected by these systems and measures. And so that is our work as well. That is rapid response work. And then, you know, this, the truth and reckoning, which I just spoke about, like, how do we understand pandemics really surface the political determinants of health that, you know, we are so grateful and so enraged that our frontline healthcare workers and providers don't have what they need to take care. What we also know is this has been the case for so many of our folks who do frontline response work in all kinds of forms and fashions. And that those are about, again, structural determinants, political determinants, and that context. And that what happens once a person is in a hospital or in a system, there's a whole journey of political, from some vantage point, failures, from some vantage points, it's successes about what took them there. And so how do we really take what becomes the embodied experience to understand that it's actually, you know, really externally driven. And when we talk about legacy and structure, that we understand, and we, as an organization, that all violence, whether it's interpersonal, community, police violence, that all violence is state violence, because this country runs on violence. It is that insidious and that explicit. And so then our interventions have to really sort of understand and address that violence is not an aberration. So something like a pandemic is, right, the convergence of so many forms of violence that don't get named or that get understood as just natural and normal ways of being. I think also, again, how do we understand our work and our roles for those of us who are working in organizations, institutions, agencies? We've signed on to this work. We have made the choice to be in this work. And I know choice can also come with, you know, feeling obligation. Like, I feel like I'm living my purpose, I'm doing my purpose, but I still have a choice to show up to my job and be in my work. And so if our work is to really transform systems, then our work is to figure out where and how are we protected by these systems? Where do these systems engage in predatory ways? And so, you know, as a overeducated queer woman of color who has a United States passport, I operate and am protected in a multitude of ways. I also know, you know, I grew up in racial terror and immense domestic violence, you know, kind of cradled in patriarchy. And so, you know, it's all of that, and all of us have to really understand our social conditioning and our social positioning to figure out what's our role. The role of white people in ending supremacy is very different than the role of Black folks, Indigenous folks, people of color. But if we've signed up to this work and whatever our roles are, we still have roles in all of that. And again, we build loving community to build loving power, to build loving systems. That is how we enter into and engage in all the work. And I will say that doing work in a way that centers relationships, that centers love, doing rapid response work that centers relationship and centers love is way more rigorous than any kind of, Excel spreadsheet we can make about who's dropping stuff off where and when and how. That's all important. But if it's not done with love, if it's not done with understanding, this is about mutuality, then it is just transactional and continues to perpetuate the systems that protect many of us and that, again, are predatory for too many of us. I think I'm going to stop there. I can share a few other things that have sort of emerged out of this effort, including the development of a city rapid response fund. But I want to stop there for just questions, comments, feelings.
I think I'm on duty for unmuting. Let's see, can people raise hands? If I can figure out, oh, Allison's back.
So
I'm
far,
sure
no one has left any questions or comments. So maybe you want to ask a question that people can answer.
I have questions.
Okay.
You have something, Kanwarpal, that you want to start with, but I have a bunch.
Okay.
Well, one thing is, and this could just be my naiveness, but that you're able to work, because I looked at your list and you have probation and the city of Richmond, and you have these, like you said, electeds are part of this table that you've created, and you're working without MOUs. And I wonder, do you have that kind of history in West Contra Costa County that you're able to do that? Or how are you able to move like that and, actually get people to follow through, both in the concrete ways, because I know everybody's trying to follow through in the concrete ways, but also like that, the intentions, the commitments, the power shifting, like all the way that you have framed what this work should look like. How did you get those actors to work together? Is it just how things are in West Contra Costa County?
Yeah, good question. So RYSE, we opened our doors in 2008, but our work really began in the early 2000s. So, I feel like for us, the ability to gather folks and bring folks is because even since before we opened our doors, we center relationships. So relationships are everything. If, the programs that we run at RYSE are platforms to build loving, healing relationships, right? And so I think it is a testament to our ability, like even for the systems that, we have to come up against and have to go up against, we also insist on relationship with them. We also know that folks in the systems are traumatized. So we acknowledge that, right? But we also acknowledge that that trauma can't be what directs and runs the way you do the work. So how can we actually create and hold space for that? But our expectation is still that, we're going to sort of work and shift together. I think we work really hard to create, again, like always starting with, holding with humanity, but also knowing like my job is to tell the truths of what's going on with and for our young people. Like that's my job. And it doesn't mean it's not scary. It doesn't mean like I don't have, fears, anxiety. Like if I say something this way, even saying the words white supremacy, like it's ridiculous. We would even feel like we have to sort of be fearful of saying that given the world we're in, but it still is something that, we think about, like, but we still have to do that. Like, otherwise I feel like we're not responsible stewards of these resources that belong to our communities. And I think that's what, it's that piece of it, that relational piece, that is what has allowed us to bring folks together. And what I will also say is that we are now 7 weeks into this shelter in place, and I also know enough to know that as we actually continue to move towards the systems transformation piece, the truth and reckoning piece, I will not be surprised with systems and agencies that can't, like, you know, we'll have to sort of choose differently. We will remain sort of and keep the door open, right? And we're going to insist on staying in partnership because they're responsible for young people. And that is our work. But I'm also not going to be surprised. Like you know, it's sort of like we're going to meet folks where they are, but we're not going to like wait. And I think especially for folks that are in predominantly white organizations or institutions, like we can't wait. And so there's both this place of it's our job is to hold the systems accountable, but it's also like we have to build our own systems. And I think that the opportunity for that, of that dreaming, is also what keeps people coming back, that we can actually dream something outside of what we have.
I'm gonna step aside because I see hands are going up. I just want to follow up with that, just to say, what is your thought on people who maybe don't have that relationship building? Like you said, you do this all the time as part of how RYSE moves, and so the relationships are already there. What would be your recommendation for people who are living in communities where that basis hasn't been established, of course, to start, but they also want to get some of what you've got going on really quickly because the communities are in need? Do you have any inspirations for that?
I feel like you start where you are and with what you have, right? If you're two organizations or two programs or two people who feel like, you can start to coordinate with each other and build from that, that we have to start with what we have, and honor that and move in that way. I think what can always be present, and there's a way in which there's the work that happens, but the framework is so much bigger and has so much potency in it that it will invite other people. And so there's what's the work to be done, but there's also in what framework and under what framework. And I think we're going to tire out if we're just in reaction and response. That wears people out because we don't see what we can create. But yeah, I hear that. And I think, we wish there's other things we could be doing and holding, like we're like, oh, we're seeing other things happening. We have to figure out what do we have and where do we start to make those things happen. And I would just offer that for others.
Thank you.
Oh, Kathy had a fun question. I'm going to unmute you. Let's see. So I think what happens when I click unmute is that it asks you to then unmute, right? Cool.
My question was, how did you get so wise?
Oh. No one's ever asked that question. I just feel really grateful. I feel like, I'm, part of a legacy of learners, right? Like, it's just like continually learning, and being open to it and willing to be vulnerable and make a lot of mistakes. I feel like that's really how I try to be in the work. That's how I think as an organization we move. And that, again, what I'm sharing, I feel like is just, generations and centuries of knowledge and knowing, that I get to actually sort of be a part of, and in this platform get to share and co-learn with you all.
Amazing. Okay, so Adriana, I'm gonna unmute you. Did that give you a pop-up? Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, thank you very much. So basically, I'm in New Zealand, and in New Zealand we have the Indigenous peoples who are Māori, and I'm part Māori. So basically, what you're saying is really, really helpful because it can be translated to the New Zealand context. Because from our perspective, from my perspective, there is intense anger within me and within others like me. So basically, what I've learned from this is that currently I'm under reaction and that reaction and response, and maybe what we need is a framework, a strong framework, which you have shared, which is really helpful. But it's also about building a sphere of influence, and that there are many people out there waiting for that moment, and this moment has come because, like you said, the pandemic has created that tipping point. And now people are realizing that there's actually lots of inequities, but it's the naming of those inequities that you said that's really important. The other thing you said is it's about solidarity, not charity. And what I found in New Zealand, in my experience, is we give charity, and charity makes people dependent. So that's what I see from the work in what I do, is that you give all the time and you disempower people. But what you're talking about sounds like you're empowering people and you're pulling people together, and you're making people rise up and speak out and name those things. And it's bloomin' confronting, and it's hard, and it's scary. So I'm just saying, from New Zealand, oh my goodness, thank you, because oh my goodness, this is just, when you've just said it, it's just simplified it, and it's just about me reaching out to others who are also on a journey, making mistakes, and not saying, oh, here's my business plan. I've been all tied up with, oh, what's my business plan? I've got to get a foundation, get the people together first. Oh my goodness. This is so amazing, and thank you for that, because this is so empowering. Thank you. That's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for making this call so early for you. Yeah, and I also want to say that, and we still have to do our business plans. I mean, as an organization, right, we had to have a business continuity plan. We have to continue to do that. And so I think there's this naming, like, the work that we were already doing, especially those of us who work organizations led by people of color, about people of color, like, we have to do double, triple, quadruple the work, and now we have to do it tenfold. Because we also have to bear the burden of the psychological wounding and anger. And that's not what funders want to hear. That's not what systems want to hear, right? That's not what well-intentioned white folks want to hear. But it is what needs to be heard and what needs to be said. And so, yeah, I appreciate I can feel your heart and your spirit, and thank you. And I wanted to give one example of that piece around solidarity, not charity, and how it's landed for us, and that, we knew this, and also it was expressed pretty early on, the need for direct financial support because of the loss, of money for so many families. And so we began working pretty swiftly on how do we create a process just to get money to people. So it's not about, do you need grocery? I mean, it is that, but it's like, we trust, I mean, we all know what we need, right? And so why would we as an organization think we can assess that? But how can we get funds? And we've been really careful about that. This is, it's not financial assistance. It is a disbursement, right, of resources that actually belong to our community. These are resources that have been stolen, extracted. Wealth has been built, extreme wealth has been built on these resources that belong to our communities already. So it is a small, even offensive allocation, a return of resources. And that's how we actually frame and language it. So we don't call it assistance. And because the idea of assistance is for those of us like who are in positions to give, it also then enables us to think like that's enough, and that our action of giving is not then sort of met with the understanding that that action comes from an equitable sort of conditions and economic model that continues that kind of dependency. And then we make judgments around it. So, you know, the language even we're using is so critical, that it's not assistance. Like, this money was fucking stolen from our peoples, and it's our money. And we believe that in all the funds that and resources that we steward with our communities.
Okay, we have a comment and a question from Regina. I'm gonna give you the option to unmute. Oh, there it is.
Hello.
Hi, Regina.
Hi, I'm so glad to see you again since the ACES conference, and so impressed with all of your work. I can't wait to have future conversations with you, but also impressed with your website and the resources that you've made available to the community, and even some of it helped me as a grad student. And I was just like, wow, I wish we had things like this here in Sacramento. And I love your transparency, the work that you're doing, whether it's COVID or not. I mean, you're jumping into the fire, and I just love that Phoenix, that rising Phoenix attitude, that you come in ready to allow that, you know, let those feathers fall where they need to fall. But I'm really curious about, like, when it comes to the additional work for our babies, in particular our brown, black, and tan children that have been, you know, that are going through so much more trauma as a result of this COVID, with the increase of the abuses that are happening in their households, whether it be through addiction, physical abuse, or just witnessing those things that these, you know, as educators, and that's the arena that I come from, in special ed in particular, some of these kids are being victimized. I have one kid in the Solano County right now. He's been pulled in by a senior citizen and has left his home, has been out in the street for about 2 weeks right now, and he's intellectually disabled. And so she's basically shut everything down and put him in more isolation. And so he's sleeping in a car with this senior citizen that was his reading tutor, and he's illiterate. And so she's gaining access to, like, his Social Security benefits, open up credit cards for him, shut down his mail back his keys and his technology to his parent. And this weekend, I think we'll be going on 3 weeks that he's out there, and we don't know if he's been subjected to any other things like drugs being injected in the system whatsoever. And so I was just wondering about, like, you know, healing circles and places, you know, that allow students to be able, not just students, but our young adults, to be able to get access for a safe space to have a conversation that they may not be able to get to a mental health provider. And that's something also I've discovered even in my research, is that our babies and our parents will not necessarily go out and have that conversation, because what goes on at home stays at home is what most of us were raised with. That's been our indoctrination as minorities. And I think it's out of fear of destruction of families, you know, and knowing that if I open up, you know, and now everybody knows my ACE score, then now, you know, I get snatched it from my family. And so, so I'm just curious about, you know, healing circles, if that's a door or an avenue that you have available. And I would love to be able to volunteer on that, and if you do. And so, because I just got certified, so and you know, I also feel like it's a good place for parents to know they can get some comfort as well. And I just thought I would throw that out there to you to see if that's available. I'm looking for communities that you know, create that kind of a space. And so thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Good to see you. And let's definitely kind of follow up around the situation you're talking about, see if we can make some connections and supports. And, you know, I will say again, I get to be part of an amazing community and team of risers who, I mean, within a week, just like whipped around our on-site programs online and virtually started calling members, right? So making sure we did not lose the relationship, like just because we're going online. And again, we're trying things out, not knowing how it's going to work. So, you know, most of our programs have gone online. That said, we are definitely finding and fielding that even if, like, you know, with our social support groups, young people rely on being able to come to RYSE to be able to talk about what's going on, whether it's home, at school, right? And it can stay at RYSE, right? And that's not possible in the home necessarily, with a lot of family kin around you. And then there's just what's going on. And so even with the CARE Coalition, that continues to come up, because I think some folks know that very well, that that's happening. But I think there's also learning for a lot of other partners that the insidiousness of sort of violence and distress in the home, which again, we connect to state violence, it's every day. And I think the enormity of it is hitting folks in a way it hadn't before. And that we actually can't rely, we couldn't rely on child welfare before, we certainly can't now. But how do we have, again, community responses? So I know our clinical case management team is definitely doing more one-on-ones and sometimes like texting, right? Just what are all the platforms, inviting them with writing prompts that they can share, and that's the way folks are engaging. Are there codes that, you know, what are some of the codes that young people can use with our staff if there is imminent danger? So all of those things we're figuring out, but again, these are also things that we know communities who could not access systems, or that knowing, yeah, accessing a system would create more disruption and more harm. I was just on a previous call with Mental Health Coalition that's held by the Anti-Police Terror Project around the work in Sacramento around mental health crisis response that doesn't involve police, right? So how do we create the systems and practices that don't require policing, or I would say even like public health systems, because they police us just as much. Maybe it looks nicer, maybe it's supposed to, the intentions might be different, but we feel that too in our health, like medical racism still exists, right? And it just keeps showing itself. So how do we still keep talking about it while we know we also have to, like, you know, hold grace and space and appreciation for our first responders and for our hospital systems. But that's the part about what are the systems we need to create so that, yeah, we're not relying solely on these current systems and that the resources go to ours. But yeah, there's also, you know, we're part of different alliances that are looking at how are people doing healing. I think circles are harder to do, honestly, by Zoom. Especially, you know, we run programs with young people that we've met them at the point where they've engaged in harm and they've caused the harm, but we work with them knowing that that's not the first point of harm and engagement for them. And that we know our young people, for so many, they say the most traumatic sort of experience they've had is when they cause the harm. Even after years and years of being harmed themselves, for them, that was the most traumatic, which I think is something that is not understood by so many providers and so many systems, how aware our young people, and especially like Black and Brown young people, are around their responsibility. And yeah, that's the enraging piece of it. That it's just, it's absolutely, that is violence, that our systems don't see the humanity of our children, and so treat them in a way that's still just about containment. So all of that to say, like, we're doing what we can, but we know we have to do more, and it continues to shine a light on, you know, all of this is political work. So if we're folks committed to this work, we have to be willing to be political to do the work.
We have one more question from Afomia. I'm going to unmute you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this conversation. I think it's timely and so necessary. My question is, how do we shift our leaders to have a framework that is responding to this pandemic that is not just rooted in just transactional or reactivity, but really takes into consideration truth, reconciliation, community love, and healing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we have to we have to do it. So it's both like insisting and expecting like the leaders that get elected or that hold, you know, big positions, but also I think it's who are we also naming as our leaders, who actually hold and model and live kind of those values and principles. And so we, you know, when we get asked like, what have we changed as an organization since COVID? And yeah, there's things we've changed operationally, mechanically, right? But we aren't like, we have to double and triple down on our values and strategies and principles. And so we have to continue to model and practice what it means to be transformational. And that like transformational means about, you know, how we're showing up in relationships. And so those systems leaders, you know, some of them will step into it, some of them won't, but we have to keep doing it. And then we have to have the spaces with each other to co-regulate and to be able to share our anger and our frustration, because I also don't think it's the rage that so many of that we righteously should have. We also know there's consequences. And so we also need to know where those places of sanctuary that we can go to be able, again, to decompress, to express with safety and sanctuary so that we can show up in these ways.
We're 5 minutes till, so that'll be a last question and we'll wrap up, but I just wanna, when you say that, like finding that sanctuary, because I have had the great joy of going to a lot of trainings at RYSE that you've led. One of the things that you often will talk about is beloved community. And I remember one time you expressed how coming to places like, you know, the forums that we've had, when you do have to go, and you've talked about it being, you and other people have talked about it being scary, when you do have to go in front of those leaders and tell them, speak truth to them, even if that community is not in the room with you at that moment, they're not with you, and you might be the only one, you know that that community is with you. Like, so by building it, you can take it, you can take it with you into those spaces. So that's one way to kind of give you the courage to do what you're emphasizing, what needs to be done, what must be done, especially if you're people who have you have access to those spaces, because a lot of times people that you're serving don't have the ear of their elected officials or people who can who control those levers of change. So I am so grateful that you're actively doing this work. So to come onto a call and share with others, it is probably not that easy to fit into your schedule, but I'm happy that the people who are able to attend the call and people who will watch the recording after will have the opportunity to think about how to reframe their work and move forward. And hopefully they'll share about it on ACES Connection. Most people probably got here through ACES Connection, but just know you can, it's free to join. And we also have community pages that are rooted in geography and also interest-based communities that you can also join to continue these conversations. And Kanwarpal has been a contributor, and so you can find some of her work there, as well as RYSE Youth, I always say RYSE Youth Center, RYSEcenter.org. If you've never been exposed to RYSE, you want to go there, because there's you want to go to that website, because a lot of the materials, when she was showing those intersecting layers, there's a lot of material that helps you think about how to do that reframing. So I would encourage you to do that. And plus you could learn more about RYSE. There's videos about the programming and all of that. And so with that, I'll let Kanwarpal have our very last word before we say goodbye.
Thank you. I'll just say, I know some people asked for my email address. I realize that's not in there. So I put it in the chat, and I can send all this information to Danielle and Allison to get out to folks. Will probably be a blog about it, maybe at some point too. So, but if you don't catch my email here, you can go to RYSE's website and it's there. But it's Kanwarpal@RYSEcenter.org.
Well, thank you.
And I'll just say, I hope we can continue to be tender in our relations and strident in our solidarity.
A beautiful message. All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful afternoon, and we look forward to hearing about the work you're all going to do in the coming weeks and months.
Bye.
Bye.